Welcome to the first ever Beer on the Ballot podcast episode. I am Ben Rice, host of the Barley Me podcast. I'm here to talk to politicians, local politicians who are running for state and local government, because that's more important than national government. They do more for you day to day. A lot of people don't think about that. Everybody says you vote for somebody that you want to have a beer with, so I'm just making the easy, logical leap by talking to people over a beer to see, can you have a beer with them? What do they stand for? Where do they come from? What do they plan to do for their constituents? And so this is our first episode, Trial by Fire. And with me today is Sacramento City Council District 5 candidate, Caity Maple.
Hi, happy to be here.
Thanks so much for meeting me, Caity. I really appreciate it. So before we get to the politics, we got to talk beer. What are you drinking? Why are you drinking it?
Yes. So I am actually drinking the Da Dewey Brown Ale, and that's because I love anything malty. I'm a big fan of brown ales, but also I've never met a hop I didn't like. So I'm a big fan of beer in general. And in fact, I was just telling you earlier that I had a fundraiser tonight that featured Dave Gold from New Helvetia and Professor Charlie Bamforth, who's a distinguished expert on beer. And it was quite fun.
Yes, the Pope of Foam. We know him well. So yeah, I've also chosen the malty side as well. I got mini pours of the Stout Kang Imperial Stout and their barley wine, whose name I keep forgetting, and I'm a professional. It's in my notes somewhere else. Anyway, the point is, great. And what is your history with beer? Have you loved it for a long time? You're kind of new to beer? What's going on with beer?
Well, I can tell you that my first alcoholic beverage ever was a natural ice. And I won't say at what age I had it, just for legal implications, but I have since grown up. And now my love affair with beer is really focusing on local beers. I live in Oak Park, so I love walking over to Oak Park Brewery where we are now. Also love going to New Helvetia and to Bike Dog, finding my way over to Urban Roots, and so on. So big fan.
Thank you for catching that. I did forget to say we are recording at Oak Park Brewing because District 5's local brewery is Oak Park Brewing, and they're sweet. They're wonderful. They do a lot of great things for the community themselves. I'm always excited to see what they're up to. So thank you so much for giving us this time and this space to record this. All right. Brass tacks. Caity Maple, who are you? Where do you come from? What makes you qualified for city council?
Sure. It's a very big question.
I know. It's nothing.
Yeah, no big deal. Well, I'll try not to go too long, but my father was in the Navy, so I traveled around a lot. I actually was born in Jacksonville, Florida. I'm one of the only people in my immediate family that wasn't born in a small town called Decatur, Illinois, which is where my entire family is from. And then I lived in Sicily and Maine, and I went to more schools than I can count before I was in high school. Mm-hmm. We moved to Sacramento when I was 9 years old. Lived all around Citrus Heights, Rosemont, just kind of anywhere we could afford. And then we moved to Yuba City, and I went to high school in Yuba City. But I had a very tumultuous relationship with my parents. My mom wasn't really in my life, and my father was raising my sister and I on his own. But we were both very strong-headed, probably me more so. And I left home when I was 16. I kind of always thought that I would be back, but I never did. And so I eventually ended up moving back to Sacramento when I was 17 and started going to American River College. I spent 5 years in community college because I was waiting tables and bartending. And I always say that my first career was in restaurants. I did that for about 8 years. Eventually went to UC Davis, where I got my degree in psychology, and then started working in my first professional job, which was in the state capitol. I worked for the chief clerk's office of the assembly. I then worked for a think tank policy wonk position at a nonprofit called California Forward, where I focused on elections policy. And at the tender age of 24, became somewhat of an expert and have published research on how elections are funded in California, which is not the sexy side, but like the literally how are they administered and funded by the government, which it turns out it's I won't bore you with it, but there's a lot to it. And because nobody had done that research before, I ended up traveling to different states and talking on the topic. And I even got called to testify as an expert witness in front of the Senate Joint Budget and Elections Committee, which was terrifying at 24, but I did it. And then I later went on and became an advocate, and I started representing nonprofits and local governments, and I got known for representing weed companies, cannabis, And so now I work for a cannabis company based here in Sacramento, and I do government affairs and compliance work. So that's my professional background. And I've just always had a passion for Sacramento. I love it here. I love where I live. I feel like there's no better place to be. The walkability, the bikeability, the amount of craft beer and craft coffee we have here. And, we have a lot of challenges, including homelessness, and including our police force. But we have so much opportunity in front of us. So I'm running to help make a change.
Okay. So you're out on your own, 16, go to college, end up getting a degree in psychology, and immediately get into the political spectrum. How does that happen? How do you make that jump? How do you get into that field? That
is a great question. So part of the challenge of going to school for me was I was working 2 jobs. So I was actually working a job at a bar, a British pub in Carmichael that doesn't exist anymore. And I was working another job at a breakfast restaurant. And so I was commuting to Davis Monday through Thursday for school. And honestly, I was really worried because I had a car that was breaking down that I couldn't afford to fix. I was regularly going negative in my bank account and trying to pay rent, and just really struggling financially at the time because I didn't have financial help from my family or to go to school. And so it was a burden because I would work 40 hours every week between Friday and Sunday. I did that for 2 years. I would go to my bartending shift at Friday. I'd end at 3 a.m. I'd drive directly to my waitressing shift, sleep in the parking lot for half an hour, start my waitressing shift at 5, get off at 2, nap, do it over again, 3 a.m., 5 a.m., and then I eventually get off on Sunday and crash out before I had class the next day. And so an opportunity came to me my last semester at Davis, or last quarter at Davis, where there was a program called the UC Center, which I now am an advisor to. And it's a program to intern in somewhere in government, whether it's for a political office or a nonprofit or, state government or something. And I literally only took the opportunity because I got credit for it and I didn't have to commute to Davis for a quarter. Swear. And it was totally a financial decision on my part because I'm like, can I do another quarter of like my car breaking down or if I get another ticket? And so I did. I took it and I got offered an opportunity to intern at California Forward, which, if you noted earlier, I went back and worked there for a couple of years. And I loved it. I totally fell in love. I'm a huge policy nerd. I got to do research on budgets and elections and campaign finance reform. And I just realized that was where I wanted to be. And psychology and politics are not that different. In order to, anybody can learn about the history of politics, which is, political science. But understanding motivation and behavior and why people do the things that they do is so much more valuable, I think, when you're kind of navigating politics. And so I found my way quickly.
Yeah, the psychology of politics is very real. So knowing all of that, obviously you're running not just because I feel like running, you, like any good candidate, have a platform. What are your goals? What are your intentions? What are the things that you're fighting for? What are the things that are going to be an uphill battle? The things that you think you can get done in your first term of service? What do you got going on?
Yeah. So for me, I'm running on a really progressive platform. I know that's a big word that can mean a lot of things to a lot of people. But for me, that means actually being a representative of the people. For a long time, this is no knock on anybody who's currently sitting up, in City Hall, but the reality of the political system that we have, which is money in politics, is that those who have the money wield the power. And for a very long time in this city and cities all across the United States of America, there's business interests, there's developers, there's people who have the money to spend that know that they can put that in the race. And if you look at how people vote, you'll see that they do make an impact, and that's how people vote. And I'm running specifically not taking money from a lot of these sources so that I can be a candidate for the people. Most importantly, to me is the neighbors that are on our streets that have no voice in City Hall, right? People are dying. I was just at a vigil the other night for people who died out in the storm, 6 people. There have been hundreds of people that have died in Sacramento on the streets in the last couple of years.
Yep.
And we very rarely even know what their names are. And it was so powerful for me to sit there and hear that. And that's what motivates me to do this, is to actually be a voice and to stand up for that. And so that's going to encompass a lot of things. It's focusing on building wealth for people, right? And focusing on communities that haven't been focused on in the past. Oak Park's a great example of that. Oak Park is, a relatively small part of the district compared to the rest of it. That may change with redistricting. We can get into that nerdiness later. But most of the money and the resources and the energy have gone to other parts of the district, and it shows. And what we need to do is invest our money where it matters the most, right? Not in the neighborhoods that already have money. And so I'm really focused on the people's budgeting, participatory budgeting, making sure that the community has a say in how the money is spent, because they know how to budget. They do it every day, right? When you're spending more than 30% of your income on your rent, you know how to budget, right? Those are the people that should be telling us how to spend the money, and making sure that we're providing services for people that work.
Okay. Yeah. I was going to ask you, because you mentioned you're not taking money from the typical sources that you see in a politician. You have a history with campaign financing, obviously, like you said. So what are you doing to raise funds on that? What are your plans on that? What are you not doing that would be considered normal? Where are you getting your income besides from individuals?
Sure. So I'm really focusing on small dollar donations, like people power. That matters. We've seen campaigns win like this. Caity Valenzuela won on this in the city of Sacramento, beat out an incumbent. We're seeing this at the national level, people like AOC, right? So there is a very real ability to win a campaign nowadays by focusing on the people and not just going to the easy. And so often in the past, it's been, here's the roadmap to getting elected. Cozy up to these people with money, ask them for big checks, and then walk on home, right? To me, that's not working. Like, to me, I need to be knocking on every single door in the district. I need to be talking to everybody. I need to be asking people for, hey, what can you spare $10 or $5, right? That's going to be what it's about. I've committed to not take any police union money as a part of the campaign. And I personally committed to not taking any big developer money as part of this campaign. And that's not because I'm necessarily anti-development. I think there's a component of development that's very important to growing the city. But I think that they have enough voice as it is. And I want to make sure that I'm going in and being impartial. And as I look at every project, I'm listening to the community, and I'm not thinking in the back of my head, oh, I got a big check from that developer during my campaign. I wonder what they're going to think.
Yeah. And when you're talking about focusing on your constituents' wealth, this is a historic neighborhood where a lot of people are being forced out by developers. So I can understand where you're coming from on that, because those people need to have a voice, and there needs to be a way that they know they're safe in their homes from not just crime, not just unwanted attacks by authority figures who are a little out of control in Sacramento, unfortunately. I try not to politicize it, but it's still me. I'm still going to be who I am. And also, just, are you safe in your home as far as your financial security when there's a consistent push to renovate? And, Oak Park is a historically black neighborhood, and we are on Broadway, which is beautiful to look at, but also there's an underbelly of development over the years that has kind of pushed people out. So I guess my question, what do you mean? And I've kind of fed you answers, I guess, or my opinion on what would be a good answer, but I'm not the person. I'm only one person. You're trying to convince a bunch of people. What do you mean when you're talking about your constituents' wealth, and what is your plan to make sure that they can secure that?
Sure. So I really like that you brought up gentrification, because I serve on the board of the Oak Park Neighborhood Association, and that's one of the number one things that I hear from people, both in the group that we have on Facebook, which has hundreds of members, people who show up to the meetings, and people that I talk to in the neighborhood. Like, gentrification is the number one issue that people are concerned about, and rightly so. The housing prices have risen, not just in this neighborhood, but all around the city and all around the state. But particularly in Oak Park, they've gone through the roof, and people are afraid that they're not going to be able to live here anymore. And many people have already been displaced. And then you look at new projects coming in, like Aggie Square, for example, which is something that people are talking a lot about, or some of these like newer homes that are getting built. And people wonder, what can we do? I don't have all the answers to that, and I don't know if everybody does. But I think that we need to focus more on how we can address this. Some of the things that I've looked at are things like community land trusts, right? How can the city help subsidize folks, or rental assistance as well? How can the city help subsidize folks? Like, if you've historically lived in this neighborhood, you should never get priced out because someone decides to build something down the road. Yeah. Right. And you have, something like Aggie Square, where you've got, I think they have like 3,000 or 4,000 new jobs that are going to come in, not including construction jobs. Where are those people going to live? Right. And those are people that are making, higher incomes. I think the average income in this area is about $35,000 a year. Don't quote me on that. I need to go look up, but I think that's what I saw. And so we need to put policies in place to make sure that people can afford to live here. And this brings me to like one of my bigger points about my campaign and why I think it's a little bit different than some of the other campaigns that I've seen run is I'm not coming in saying that I know all the right answers.
Right.
Like, I think it would be very arrogant of me to come in and say, I know how to fix all this. But politicians do that a lot. And what I'm doing instead is I'm listening because I believe that the community knows best what they need. And they need to tell me. I think a representative's job is to listen and to implement what people need and what they want and to be creative. And so that's a big part of what I'm going to be doing. This election's about a year and a half away. So I have not a lot of time. It seems like a long time, but it's not, to really make my way around and make sure that I'm listening to people and figuring out creative ways to address their concerns. And gentrification is a big part of that. And in terms of wealth, which was your original question, I think we need to focus. I'm a big believer in policies like universal basic income. Mm-hmm. I think that in order to bridge gaps, especially gaps like the black wealth gap versus the white wealth gap, is very, very real. And the only way you do that is if you invest. You build capital, right? You help build up black home ownership, right? The city can invest in that if they choose to. Right. And a part of that might also be things like reparations, which is something that I've suggested. I was looking up the cannabis tax revenues for the city of Sacramento. I think we got something like $14 million last year from our cannabis businesses specific. Why is that money not going towards people who've been impacted by the war on drugs? Why is it not going to communities that have been impacted by the war on drugs? Why are we not talking about things like reparations? So I think that all of that can go back to help people in their communities right now build their wealth.
Yeah. And since we're on the topic of cannabis, which is the political term for, hey, marijuana, weed, I love that it's like, even in the questions that I got, because I put out a Google form, it's still, you use the word cannabis. Historically, what we're talking about is, okay, well, the movement for legalization of cannabis has been going on for 30, 40, 50, 60 years at this point. It's a new thing somehow. But what we're seeing is consistently white business owners taking control of this industry that has historically been, when it's a minority dealing with it previous to that, it was dealt with massive consequences, fines, jail time, like long sentences. And now it's like, oh, it's okay. And the people that have come and profited off of it after years of people taking a risk for a drug that does not really carry a significant danger to individuals or community. And then you're involved in that. So how do you kind of balance that?
Sure. So I work in the cannabis industry currently, and you're 100% right. You know, one of the challenges that's in front of us is the industry, those who own, especially like the bigger companies that are really successful, are white, you know, and people who have been criminalized by the war on drugs, have been jailed, have had their lives destroyed over it, are not the ones that are able to participate in the regulated market. And that's for a few different reasons. One, it's incredibly expensive. Mm-hmm. Not just expensive to actually like get property and get product and pay employees and open up a store, which it costs the company that I work for about $1 million. Mm-hmm. And we've streamlined it. It may cost, because we've opened now 8 stores in California. So like, that's how much it costs before we ever pay an employee, before we ever do anything, you know? And so it's the regulatory costs as well. We have a very robust regulatory system that I've navigated, which is part of my job. And I think a lot of it is based on fear. So hopefully they change a lot of that policy, because it's not like we're dealing with a radioactive chemical here. We're dealing with a plant that people have been using for centuries. But because you have all these barriers, these regulatory barriers, these financial barriers, right? And they're not making any concerted effort to really prioritize the groups that have been criminalized. This is what you get. Who has money? White people. Yeah. Who owns the companies because they have money? White people. And so I think that back to the city, because, you know, we're not going to fix the whole state of California right now. Right. We're not going to fix this nation, but we can focus on Sacramento.
Right. Start local like you should.
Yes.
Because local becomes state, state becomes federal.
So I actually recently just talked with Councilmember Vang about this proposal. Another way that we can use some of that $14 million a year-ish in cannabis tax revenues is in Sacramento, there have been 30 dispensaries for many, many years, because the city put a moratorium. They said nobody can open up another cannabis dispensary. It's been 30. And those 30, as you've seen in the news in the SACB, are not owned by any people of color. Mm-hmm. And so the city recently came in and passed a new ordinance that said, okay, we're going to allow 10 new retail licenses for cannabis in the city. Amazing. And these are all going to go to the core program, which is the equity program. People in there who want to open up a business. Great. So back to my original point, it costs $1 million to open up a dispensary. How? You know, it's incredibly difficult to get funding as a cannabis business because of the federal legalities.
Because any day now they could just come in and be like, no, I don't care what your state says.
Well, banks won't work with you.
Yeah, because any day the federal government could be like, hey, we know California says it's legal, but we're still the government of the United States.
Yeah.
And here it's still not legal.
Which they did all during the Prop 218 era,
Yes.
which is before Prop 64 that passed in 2016 that most people recognize as legalizing
consistently
cannabis.
Breaking them down down in Los Angeles County, correct?
Yeah, and all in Sacramento too.
Yeah, all over.
And so my suggestion or my proposal was, let's set aside tax dollars, some of those cannabis tax revenues. So we're not taking anything out of the general fund. We're not taking away anybody's hard-earned tax dollars as citizens. We're saying these cannabis companies that are not owned by people of color and that have profited off of the industry, what they're giving to the city, let's take some of that money and provide grants to these core equity applicants that are trying to open up these cannabis businesses that are incredibly expensive. That would be a really great way to promote ownership of dispensaries in the city. And because I fear right now, if we don't do something like that, we're setting people up to fail.
Yeah. All right. So like I mentioned, I did put out a Google Doc where people could submit questions anonymously. So we got a few submissions. Want to run them by you real quick. And this one was a question I was going to ask regardless. A lot of these questions I got, I was like, well, of course, why would you not ask that question of a District 5 candidate? Question 1. District 5 includes many neighborhoods where people of color live. Why are you, newly moved to the district, the person to represent them?
Sure. So clarity, I just bought a house a few months ago in a park, but I've lived between District 4 and District 5 for over a decade. I was a longtime renter, and anybody who's been a renter knows that you move around. And I lived for quite a long time.
And you're not looking at districts when you're moving. You're like, I'm in the area I want to be in, general area.
Right. And, like the district, Oak Park is a really important part of the district, but the district is really large and actually more encompasses parts of like Lamb Park and Curtis Park and all these other areas. And those are places that, I'm familiar with. So I wouldn't consider myself new here. I'm definitely not new to the city. Yeah. And so to the second part of the question, I'm not currently familiar with any other candidates who have announced or who have formally said anything about running. So I understand the question, but I also think that, I would encourage anybody to come and talk to me, because at this point, if I were to do something like that, it would be dropping out and not really clear that anybody else is running. Yeah. But to build on that, up until very, very recently, there was only one woman on the city council for about like 6 or 7 years, right? And if I'm elected, I'll also be the youngest person on the council. I think there's a lot of ways to represent people besides what I look like. And I think that I can, back to my original point of really listening, that's what this campaign is going to be about. And that's especially listening to people of color, especially listening to the concerns that people have. And that's why I want to represent.
Yeah, and you mentioned the second part of the question, which was, of course, which I didn't state, but I know I shared the doc with you so you could kind of prep for it, which was why not instead support the candidacy of a person of color with longer, bigger ties in the community, which you answered as far as you're not aware of anybody running against you currently, which is true. But I added a follow-up on my end. So what do you feel gives you gravitas in this district that people should want to support you?
I think for me, it's messaging. It's about the issues, right? I'm not aware of any candidates besides Caity Valenzuela recently in District 4, and in some cases, Vang in District 8, who are talking about the really progressive issues that I'm talking about. Things like reparations, things like universal basic income, things like people's budgeting, right? So this is, I think there's an importance for demographics and representing communities and seeing someone that looks like you. And I totally understand that. But I also think that it's important that doesn't also get lost in people who don't embody the values that I believe in. Unless someone has a really progressive agenda like that, I will take into consideration their candidacy. But at this point, I'm not seeing anybody else with that kind of platform.
Okay. And the next question is a few different parts. I do apologize. I'll speak on behalf of the person submitting the question, even though this also speaks for me. It's not my question. Okay. I know, as we've already discussed, you're already active in supporting the unhoused and others in extreme poverty. What ideas to build on those efforts will you bring to the city council?
Sure. So I think at the end of the day, this is something that's so much bigger than the city of Sacramento. And I think that they allude to that at some point in their question. Mm-hmm. At the end of the day, we need housing and we need We need permanent supportive housing for people. We have people on the streets and we need to get roofs over their heads. And that's going to require a lot of different solutions. What I like to say is there's just as many homeless people as there are solutions and reasons for being homeless. For some people, I used to serve on a city commission. Get ready for this name. It's called the Ann Land and Bertha Henschel Memorial Funds Commission. And its role was giving out small grants to nonprofits that focus on the quote unquote destitute, which we determined to mean people who are unhoused. And a lot of those organizations are doing prevention work as well. It's like sometimes people are on the streets because they couldn't pay their SMUD bill.
Yeah. It's almost nothing.
Right.
It's like a few $100.
Right.
To solve that issue at least for a few months.
Yes. Oh, yeah. Or maybe rental assistance, right? Which is something that's currently happening with the county. If you need rental assistance, please connect with me. Like those things can happen, right? And there's also women who are just escaping domestic violence. That's a completely different solution, right? Than someone who needs help paying their SMUD bill. And then you have folks who, the most common linking chain for people on the street, at least as far as I can tell, is trauma. People are experiencing trauma. And then being out on the street itself is traumatizing.
And there's so many different kinds of trauma.
Absolutely.
It can be you have a mental illness, which people tend to believe is the case. Not usually the case. It can be you got laid off from work unexpectedly. You lost your job. You lost a relationship. It was an abusive relationship. There's so many reasons that the world is so tenuous. The way that we designed it is so tenuous. Like I think about this all the time. I am in a 5.5-year relationship with my girlfriend. And I always think if something went sideways, where would she go? Because there's also the pay gap you got to worry about. Like she does not make nearly the money I make, and at the cost of living in Sacramento, I'm like, where would she end up if something went bad? And so we had constant communication. But there's a lot of things that face it, and there's really no affordable housing plan in Sacramento. Correct. They've been eliminated piece by piece for decades.
Yep. And I think I saw a statistic somewhere that we have the same amount of public housing that we had in the 70s. And it's just, those are components.
And the population growth is not insubstantial.
Oh, yeah. Oh, it's huge. And we'll learn more once the census numbers come out. But, I think, my answer is kind of, we need to continue the conversations. We need to keep having the tough conversations. We also need to talk about the intersections, right? Like there is a disproportionate amount of people of color that are homeless. There's disproportionate amount of violence against the LGBTQ community on the street, particularly Black trans women, right? If we're not talking about this and taking a look at the specific sections of people who are really suffering, we're not having the real conversation around it. And I think for me, one of the biggest things that we can do is create a coordinated intake system, which is something that supposedly has been being worked on for many years. I've yet to see it. I hope that it's happening soon. But we're seeing the same people come in over and over again, and we're having the same conversations with them over and over again because there's no one system that we can look at and be like, oh, okay, hey, I know you. I know that you're suffering from this and you need this kind of medication or you need this kind of help or you're, escaping your abuser or whatever. And then we can make sure that we're triaging them into the right place so that we're not just we're spinning our wheels trying to create a one-size-fits-all solution that's never going to work. And so I think one is coordinated intake, two is more housing and shelters. We just don't have enough. This is one thing that people don't realize. A lot of people that I talk to that are kind of unfamiliar with the nuances of homelessness is there are no shelter beds, period. Any given night of the week, 0. There's a waiting list. There's no affordable housing, 0. There's nothing. So there is this narrative that goes around that they just don't want help or that they're turning it away or whatever. It's just not true. Almost everybody I talk to on the street wants help. Almost everybody I talk to on the street wants dignity, wants to be able to wash their hands, wants to take a shower, wants to sleep in a warm bed. And we could do that if we choose. We could provide hotel rooms. We could provide, housing. We could do all this. And so
especially right now.
Of course.
During a shutdown where people are not traveling. They're not using hotels the way they were. It's an easy fix. But I'll leave it alone because, again, you're running for city council. You've got to work with people who you may not always agree with.
No, you're good.
But
and then I just want to note
really quick. Definitely don't seem to be on board with that idea.
That's a fair point. But I do want to give credit where credit's due. Like the city is currently working on its master plan to address homelessness. They're supposed to adopt this in June. And the reasoning behind this strategy is what they've done in the past is piecemeal, like trying to, say, hey, let's do a shelter here, let's do a shelter there. And the neighbors come out and it doesn't happen, right? And so in order to kind of address the NIMBY component of this, they said, what we're going to do is we're going to create this master plan. We're going to say, here's our priorities. Here's what we're doing. And every project that meets those criteria and qualifications gets fast tracked. And there's no opportunity for people to come in and scream and yell that it's going to ruin the fabric of their neighborhood. Because that's really what's been one of the bigger stalls besides political will and money.
And for those unfamiliar, NIMBY, not in my backyard. Okay. Next question. What social service programs should be implemented so SAC-PD and other law enforcement agencies can concentrate on prevention and investigation of serious crimes rather than numerous other activities they may not have the training or resources to handle effectively?
Awesome. So one of the things that was passed at City Council after the killing of George Floyd was the creation of the Department of Community Response, which is an effort to take away most of the calls that go through the 911 system going to police, particularly if they have to do with mental health or if they have to do with homelessness. Because the realization is, hey, maybe the police aren't the right people. First of all, I don't think they want to be. If I was a police officer, I would not want, and I don't have the training for it, I would not want to be the person who gets called out to, someone who's experiencing a mental health crisis. That should be a social worker probably, right? I would not want to get called out for someone who's homeless, who has nowhere to go and is trying to barbecue on the sidewalk, right? They're trying to survive. That should probably be someone else. And so now there's this effort to create this department. It's been funded by the city. They're looking to hire someone to run it. So it's not in operation yet, but I think that's a really important step forward. And I hope that we can take that and really fund it and model it after what some other states have done, where they've reduced shootings, violence by police, right? By a wide margin by implementing a similar system. Because the reality is if all you're trained to do is react to violent situations with violence, then that's what you're going to get. And so oftentimes what we don't need is a violent solution to a problem.
And I feel like it's not necessarily a violent situation, but rather an aggressive situation. People don't want to be encroached on, and that creates like a level of aggression that's not naturally there. And then, with some mental health disorders, there is an increased aggression. So it's not necessarily a violent thing that they're reacting to. They're reacting to a natural human condition. But, okay.
Absolutely.
Just wanted to clarify on my end because I'm a...
I think you're right.
Whatever. Okay. Let's, we've had some very serious questions. We're going to have some levity here. We've got a few more. This is, most people went anonymous. This person did not. Candidate Maple, my name is Jack Brown. I'm a District 5 voter in the DSA. I love your work on cannabis and agree with your stated campaign positions. However, I am ultimately a single issue voter. And that issue is this. Do you like Ben Rice?
Yes.
Bad choice.
Because there is a right answer.
Right. I left that part out. But yeah.
Well, I don't think I'd be here if I didn't like you. Well, maybe I would.
Well, yeah. You take the opportunity to give it. Anyway. But he also had a real question. Additionally, even though you won't be voting on it directly, do you support AB 1400, the California Guaranteed Health Care for All Act?
Sure. And for those listening, DSA means Democratic Socialists of America. And so AB 1400, though I used to work in the legislature and I've been a legislative advocate in the past, I have not read this bill language. I'm familiar of the topic. I don't know the details of this particular bill. There's been many iterations of this bill. So I'm not going to publicly say that I support it until I do that. I really believe in doing due diligence and research, and I'm a nerd, so I probably will read all of it. But I will say that I'm 100% supportive of healthcare for all. Yeah. Period. End of story. You should never, ever, ever end up bankrupt or out on the streets or any negative consequence as a result of going to the hospital. Yeah. Of having a life event happen to you. And I think it's also really important to know that if you look at places like Canada, you look at most places in Western Europe, they have higher quality of healthcare, longer life expectancies, and they pay less for care, right? So there is a real argument here for why this is a better system than what we currently have, which is fragmented, it's broken, it's expensive, and it leaves most people behind. There's not a lot I can do on the city council to address this one specific issue, right. But I will tell you that my personal stance on it is that I will support it in any way I can, and up to including bringing a resolution on the city council floor. And if there's anything that we can do specifically at the city level, I'd be happy to do it.
Yeah. Is there a history of any cities or counties or states doing it separate from the federal government? Like, just like, hey, we know you guys aren't on board for this, but we are, and we're going to do it with our own tax money.
Well, Covered California in its own right is sort of that.
Kind of like Medi-Cal's or Medicare's kind of that.
But, not being a healthcare expert, so take this with a grain of salt, but my understanding is that it's an issue that has to be solved nationally because it involves a national chain of healthcare companies and providers. And the reality is yes, it's expensive, but what we're doing now is even more expensive. But it's expensive. It's not something that a local government can probably straddle. It's something that the federal government is going to have to step up at some point and do and provide for people because it's a right.
Yeah, and having worked in and around medical billing in my life, I will say that people are scared that the cost will be so incredible. And the thing is, the reason that Medicare or medical costs are so expensive right now is because there is no control. Anybody can charge what they want, when they want, how they want, and enforce it however they want. The insurers can pay or decline on the flimsiest of premises. And when you have a nationalized healthcare system, you can create a basic, hey, I don't care where you live. An x-ray is $200. As opposed to, oh, you're in San Francisco? Well, it's $750 here. It's $2,000 there and $5,000 there. And your insurance will cover 80% either way. Nationalized healthcare, well, it seems like it's going to be super expensive because of how expensive healthcare is. Healthcare costs are a lie. They are a fiction. They are a mythological beast. And as soon as you realize, and also the cost of medicine is also just incredible. And it's marked up thousands of %. So if you can just get it back to what's the cost of this and how do we pay the employees a livable wage? And I get it. You're properly trained. You're a doctor. You deserve a pretty decent paycheck, but there's no reason that healthcare costs what it costs. And if you go nationalized, the cost of it will drop tenfold. Like, would it be 10% of what it is now? That's like a low ball. Yeah. The only issue is how do you implement it on a massive scale quickly? And I think it's going to have to be piecemeal. You're going to have to work your way down, and people aren't on board for that. I've talked to people a lot, and their main issue is how do you implement it? And I don't think it can be a one fell swoop thing. Anyway, it's beyond the local scope.
Well, that's really good feedback, and I actually I can't help but think about some of the examples that I've seen on online or on the news where it's like someone pulls out their itemized medical bill and they're charged $10 for a Band-Aid or something. I've
seen $150 for a Tylenol.
Right.
Tylenol.
Which we all know that's absurd, right? But because it gets buried down the details, or even if it doesn't, even if you point it out on local news and say, hey, look, I got charged $150 for one pill of Tylenol, what's going to change that? Nothing. There's no accountability. There needs to be an enforcement mechanism. There has to be accountability. And, the reality is that a national run system is probably the better way to do it.
Yeah. And the amount you're paying for your health insurance now will be less than the amount you pay in taxes to support this cost. Okay. That's me politicizing. I'm sorry. I try not to do it, but I'm still a me. All right. A few more questions. Considering that unions are trying to control sides of the bargaining table, are you supported by or at all influenced by the Sacramento City Teachers Association or the California Teachers Association?
So I have not, I currently have not received any campaign contributions from either of those associations, to my knowledge, and I believe that that's true because I just looked at it before I came here. But I will say it seems like a little bit of a leading question. I don't know if I agree with the stance that they're trying to control both sides of
this is your constituent, so I got to ask
table. Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I'm just stating where I come from, and I think that I'm a firm believer in unions. My father's in a union. I grew up in a union family. I work for a union company. I think that unions represent the workers and that they have their interests at heart. I'm also familiar with some of the budgetary woes of the teachers of the district, and I think that you have teachers that have the right to be concerned about their health and their well-being. They have the right to be vaccinated before they go into classes and schools reopen. And students deserve that too. And teachers are the backbone of this country. They're the back. There would be no classroom if there were not teachers. And so, I think I don't know all of the nuances and what's happening at the bargain table. I'm definitely having conversations with, both constituents, parents, and folks who are on the school board. And, I will listen to all sides and I will try my best to understand what's going on. But, I have to believe that if the union is fighting for something, that they probably have something behind it.
Okay. Yeah. And on my end, I know a lot of teachers. I know a lot of administrators. I don't know many administrators, but I know a lot of teachers, and there's a big gap in what they're saying the money is being used for. And that's an important thing to solve. Okay, moving on. That's because, again, I'm still going to provide some basic information and maybe a little bit of my agenda, but whatever. Final question from the listeners or fans of you, whatever, whoever found that link. Final question. There will be some additional questions based on this one.
Sure.
Do you support Black Lives Matter?
Unequivocally, yes.
Okay.
I think that one of the things that's been brought to the forefront of all of our minds is over the last several years with the advent of cell phones and footage with them and seeing police brutality and violence is what people of color and specifically Black people have always known is there, and what is really coming to the collective consciousness of white people and a lot of other folks in society is systematic racism in our society, and particularly police brutality. One thing that I'm really focused on in the campaign is we instituted a police oversight commission in the city of Sacramento that was created back in 2015, and it actually had iterations previous to that that had no enforcement or advisory power, and so it was recreated to have some actual oversight power so that they could make comments on personnel issues and so on. They have, to date, created 3 reports that they have submitted to City Council about their recommendations for how the police force can be reformed to better do their jobs and make people feel safe, especially people in this neighborhood who do not feel safe around police. That's something that I hear every single day. They fear for their lives. They fear for violence from police. And to date, I believe there's only 2 of those recommendations out of the many, and I haven't gone through. I have all of them printed up on my desk at home, all of those reports. But my question is why? If we created this commission to give oversight power and authority, and they are experts. They've read everything. They've listened to everything. And their job is to bring it back to the city council and say, here's our recommendations so that we can make a police force that's safer for everybody. And they haven't been implemented. Well, that's a problem for me. Mm-hmm. And that's something that needs to be done if we actually mean what we say when we say Black Lives Matter.
And I think it would behoove many listeners to understand that with Black Lives Matter as a concept versus Black Lives Matter as a movement or a chapter within districts. I know there's some issues people have with the leaders of Sacramento Black Lives Matter. So I'm going to just say that this question is related to the basic concept of Black Lives Matter, just so that we have some clarity on that. I also noticed you use the word systematic, maybe by error, versus systemic racism. But I will say systemic racism is a built-in concept, right? Systemic, it's like, it means that from the foundation, that's what we have. Systematic is even though like it's a step-by-step process, and I would say that's also a correct usage in that there seems to be a step to enforce the racist behavior of authority figures. It's like, yes, racism is built into the concept, but there are steps that they actively use. So I feel like that's not actually a misstatement. But that's, again, my opinion. And so that's all the listener questions we have on this, but I do want to get one question that popped up on me. You've mentioned time and again that you wish to be more of a bullhorn for your constituency, not for people that have money and want more power, people that have power and money that want even more of it. So how can people get your ear to be their mouthpiece?
I give everybody who asks for it my cell phone number. So I won't say it over air, but I'll give it to Ben here. Please, if you reach out, feel free to text me, feel free to call me. Part of this job, one of the things that I'm also hearing about folks from folks in the district is they have not felt like their representative has been accessible to them, and that's going to completely change for me. I'm very fortunate that, I don't have children. I'm not married. And no knock on anybody who is, or does. But because of that, this is going to be my life. I'm going to put all of my effort and time and energy into it, and I won't be available. So I'll give you my cell phone number. I'll give you my email that you can put out to folks as well. And anybody can reach out at any time. I am still working a full-time job for now. So I promise if I do not answer right away, I will get back to you. But that's part of it. Another thing that I'm doing is I'm surveying the community right now. So I made a Google form really simple, and I'm calling it Ideas for a Better Sacramento. I have often felt this way, and a lot of other people do, that they have all these ideas like, why is there not a dog park on that corner? Or why are we not using this empty building to house people? Or so on, like all these different ideas. And some of them are really complex. Some of them are not really, singular. And they often never get to the people who actually have the power to make change and do something about it. Well, I want to change that. And so through this Google form, which I'll also share the link with you.
Thank you. It'll be in the show notes.
Yes. Anybody can submit their idea, and I post them all on my website, and I also will share them on social media, and I will take them with me because I view my platform as an ongoing, growing, ever-growing document, because you don't just decide on something and then that's all you do. It's informed by people, and it's going to continue to be informed by people heretofore. So I look forward to getting people's feedback.
Excellent. Now, you've mentioned a website, so I need to know. I think you can put this one out there. What's the website people can go to learn more, to contact you, all that stuff?
Sure. www.caitymaple.com. That's spelled CAITYMAPLE.
All right. And that seems like a lot of information to take in when people are submitting anonymously or publicly, whatever the case may be. What is your team size? What is your goal as far as that goes? Is it just you, or are there a few people helping you out?
So this is a 100% grassroots campaign right now. So it's mostly all done by me. I even, created the website. I have zero experience creating websites, so please forgive it. I do have what's called a kitchen cabinet, which is a room of people, of advisors that you're close to that have some expertise, either running campaigns or in something marketing, that advise me, but that's all on a volunteer basis. And then I'm building I hate to use the word army, but what's a good word for a lot of people?
Group, gathering, collective.
Yes.
Brain trust
of volunteers, people that are where my message is resonating with them and they want to help out. And because when the time comes, which will be soon, hopefully once folks are all vaccinated, we will be knocking on doors. We'll be knocking on your door. If you live in District 5, we'll be coming to your neighborhood association meeting. We will be talking at your community group. I will be doing office hours at coffee shops. I will be making myself available in every way possible. And if I haven't thought of it yet, please give me ideas, because I am one human, but I'm very open.
All right. And since you have a history of doing this, how are you interpreting or extrapolating data when you're getting this information?
I'm relying heavily on Google Documents and Drive and spreadsheets, and putting it all in one place and trying to synthesize it. So if I'm getting, a grouping of comments from folks that all kind of are relative to the school district, let's say, well, that's going to go into the school district bucket, and then that's going to help me flesh out my platform related to schools. If I'm hearing something related to police brutality, that's going to go over here, the budget and so on. And so just really for right now, it's putting it all in one place and then spending time just kind of going through all of it and making sure it's being reflected somewhere in my platform.
All right. And then when are people voting? What is the run-up on this?
June 7th, 2022. So a year and a half away, but it will come very quickly. Yeah. And then a nerdy thing that we didn't touch on, but there's this thing called redistricting. The city has what's called an independent redistricting commission, and its purpose is to prevent what's called gerrymandering.
Yes.
So making districts look really weird so that they can get votes that will help them get elected. So we have an independent commission of people that have to swear that they'll never vote or run for office for 10 years and a bunch of other stuff. And they are charged with taking the census data that comes in every 10 years and then redrawing those district lines, because as that population grows, you kind of have to move the lines around to make sure that you have contiguous boundaries and all this other nerdy stuff. The big drama this year is that normally that data is available in February. But because of issues with the data and the Trump administration and so on, now that data is not going to be available till the end of September. That map that the city council is supposed to approve is supposed to be approved by December of this year. I'll be very interested to see if that actually happens. So the big, I guess the big question mark with that is others who decided to jump in the race, myself included. It's hard to say whether or not the district will be the same. Will I still be in the district once that map is approved? There's a lot of arguments from folks on one way or the other. There's nerdy people that know a lot more about this than me, but that's something really interesting. If folks are interested in that, I can send them information as well.
Yeah. Caity Maple, thank you so much for being the guinea pig on Beer on the Ballot. I want to thank you so much for that. I want to thank Oak Park Brewing for letting us use their space to do this. I'm very sad that they were out of People's Beer, which I feel was the perfect beer for this conversation. But unfortunately, it's in demand, and they didn't have it. So again, check out Caity Maple. Expect more of these Beer on the Ballot as more people become active in the local government candidacies. I'll be doing it with them. If you know somebody who's running, tell them to get in contact with me. I will always meet them at a brewery in their district to have these conversations. I'll be creating individual Google Forms docs for anonymous submissions of questions. So this is going to be a thing that's going to happen, apparently, until at least June 6th, 2022. And if you have another favorite beer podcast, maybe tell them about this thing. It's not just me. Local governments are everywhere. Anyway, Caity Maple.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Appreciate you.
All right. Thanks for listening. And stay in touch. I don't know what the words are. Outro. We did it. Barley Me is still a regular podcast as well. Okay.